Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jean-Paul Tennant. I'm the CEO at GeoX. For those who don't know, we are a San Francisco-based adventure travel company. We're very happy to be here in the ever-vibrant city of New York to sponsor this fundraiser for our friends at the American Himalayan Foundation. We thought this would be an opportune moment in time to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the first successful summit of Mount Everest, which happens to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the first American summit. And we also want to celebrate the accomplishments of the very impressive Jan Morris, who happens to be the last surviving member of that original British expedition. We're very happy that Norbu Tenzing can join us today. Norbu is Vice President at the American Himalayan Foundation. American Himalayan Foundation has been in existence for more than 30 years, taking on a variety of important projects to help the people of the Himalayan region. I'd like to highlight one of them, which they refer to as Stop Girl Trafficking, thanks to the efforts of Norbu and his team. As of today, there are 9,500 girls in school in Nepal instead of having been sold off to lives of slavery and prostitution. Norbu also happens to have a famous father. Norbu is the son of Tenzing Norgay, who is one of the two individuals to summit Mount Everest for the first time. Thank you so much for being here, Norbu.
Thank you, JP. And I used to be introduced as Tenzing's son, but these days, since my brother climbed Everest, I'm normally introduced as Jamling's brother. So that's the hat I'm wearing these days. So JP, thank you. I'm really happy to be here to see so many old friends after many years over here. The relationship that we have with GeoX is something that we cherish for over 20 years now, and this is one small example of how a responsible company that is like GeoX works with partners such as us in San Francisco to sort of make a difference in a part of the world that means so much to us all, especially this evening with Everest. So thank you again for having us, and I just want to acknowledge, there's a young person here who was actually made a journey all the way from Philadelphia with his mother. He's taken the train. The youngest Everest fan who's here. Sander, would you stand up and say hello to everybody here? Yeah. Yeah. Sander's grandparents live in the Bay Area, and last year he came to see me, and he's always doing Everest projects, so he knows more about Everest than most of us in this room. So JP, thank you again for having me here. I'm really happy to be here. It's kind of odd to see friends like Vasi and Shana and Kate in New York and not in San Francisco. So I'm sure you're here to hear Jan Morris, who is absolutely a fascinating woman. It's going to be a terrific evening, so thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for being here for us. All right, before we call Jan and Don on stage, I just want to give you some brief highlights. So Jan Morris's love of travel and travel writing was born out of her early experiences as an intelligence officer in the British Army. She started writing books in the 1950s, and while working as a reporter with the Times in 1953, was assigned as the Times correspondent to the British expeditions that would ultimately summit Mount Everest. Jan is a writer whose talents are recognized well beyond the realm of travel writing. The Times has named her one of the 15 most influential British writers since World War II. Jan is known particularly for the Pax Britannica trilogy written 1968 to 1978, which was a history dealing with the rise and fall of the British Empire. She's also known for her portraits of cities, including Oxford, Venice, Hong Kong, and New York. Don George is also a highly distinguished and award-winning travel writer and editor. Don is currently editor-in-chief of Recce, Literary Journeys for the Discerning Traveler. He's been the travel editor for the San Francisco Examiner and Chronicle, and also for Salon.com. He was the global travel editor for Lonely Planet Publications. Don has published 8 books, including Travel Writing, A Movable Feast, Kindness of Strangers, and Tales from Nowhere. Please join me in welcoming Jan and Don.
Here we are, as you see. I can't see you at all. Is anybody there?
Well, first of all, thank you, JP and Norbu. Thank you very much for the introduction, wonderful introduction. And Jan, before I begin, I just want to say, before I begin to ask you questions, I just want to say what a really tremendous honor and pleasure it is to share a stage with you, and to thank you for giving me a lifetime's worth of pleasure and illumination through your work. And I think that probably all of us here share that feeling. And could you perhaps join me in a round of applause for the really good...
No, you don't have to. Some people didn't clap. I should remember.
We're taking notes. Yeah. So I understand that your outfit tells a tale in and of itself, and I wonder if I could begin by asking you about your outfit.
Yes, it's always important to talk about what one's wearing, is it not?
Yes.
And this particular outfit, stylish, as you can see, has a sort of history. I was interviewed by the Independent newspaper of London, a very good interview, very nice interview, and it said that this outfit is what I wore, which made me look like a very expensive girls' school headmistress who'd gone boho. I thought that was very fair. I thought it was just about right. And so literary functions ever since, like this one, I've worn this. But there's more to it than that, too, because this thing here, I was paid. I contributed 3 lines from my book on Venice to a catalogue that the makers of this thing make in London. And they said, instead of paying me cash, I could have anything I liked out of their catalogue. And most of it was very expensive ball gowns and stuff like that. I really didn't like to ask for one of those for 3 lines, you know. So I chose this, and it's been beloved of me ever since. I wear it for all these functions. And it has also, you can't see, fortunately, but in the back here, sorry, you might be able to see,
yes,
the signs of 3 love bites.
Yes?
Yes, well, there are, it's true.
I didn't know about the love bites part.
Oh, you didn't know about my long-term associate and indeed partner in life, who died quite recently, I'm afraid, the Norwegian forest cat Ibsen. He gave me the love bites. He used to come up here when I was working and lie around here in a very awkward way and pierced me in various places. So that's the full story of this outfit.
Wow.
Yes. Was that interesting? Thank you. Go on, Tom.
Thank you. I don't know how to make this segue, so I'll just say it is the 60th anniversary of the successful ascent of Mount Everest, and we're honoring you, and we're honoring the American Himalayan Foundation tonight, too. But I think it's still such a momentous, epic adventure, and I know people would love to hear something about the origins of the expedition and how you got associated with it. And so can you give us a sense of that first expedition and the role that you played on it and how it unfolded?
Well, I was associated with it because I worked then for a paper called The Times. nowadays they have to call it the London Times, because a new one, I believe,
some other Times
has arisen somewhere else. Yeah. So in my day, it was the Times.
Right.
And the Times, the London Times, had always had a sort of lien on the Everest expeditions of the past, because it had helped to finance them since the expeditions before the war. And as a result, they had the right to do what you taught us to say, it was embedding somebody in the expedition.
Right.
I was embedded.
You were embedded, okay.
In the 1953 expedition. And the reason I was chosen was because the average age of the people who worked on the Times in those days was well over 60. I was the only one who was fit enough, and young enough, and ambitious enough, and brutal enough to go to cover it for the Times. Because we knew then that it was going to be a dirty newspaper war. It was a very big story, perhaps not in the United States, but it was in Europe and in other parts of the world, at least in India. And we knew that everybody would try and break this embargo the Times put on the news and print it before the Times. It would be very embarrassing for all of us, not least me, I may say. So the difficulty was that it's about 200 miles from Everest to the nearest cable station, as they used in those days, before the days of satellites and all that kind of stuff. It was very old school stuff. It's a 200, very rugged mountain country. Now people trek, of course, along it, but then it was virtually unknown country. And the only way we could get messages home was for me to employ runners. Pretty basic stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Just one up from the cleft stick tradition. So I did. I rented a whole lot of very able, very nice Sherpa porters. More than porters, they were sort of high altitude people, to run this thing for me. And the faster they ran it, the more I paid them.
There you go.
So they ran jolly fast, I can tell you. And that went all perfectly all right. And we, just in case they were intercepted by rivals on the way, we did invent a simple code which just meant the replacement of certain names of parts of the mountain with another word. You see what I mean? Very simple. In fact, I gave up and I didn't use it at all. But nevertheless, a lot of these cables were intercepted, and before they got into the cable office in Kathmandu, and some newspapers around the world finished them and used them. But that wasn't terribly important. The important thing, of course, was the news that the mountain had or had not been climbed. Am I boring you?
No, not at all.
Right. That was the thing, if it had or had not been climbed. And this was made extra difficult for me, because when I got to Everest, I found that about 20, 30 miles from the mountain, there was an Indian radio post. We were not allowed to have long-range radio, otherwise, of course, I wouldn't have used the runners. Right. We had walkie-talkies, as we used to call them in those far-off days, on the mountain, but we couldn't have anything with a long range. But to discover that there was a radio station so near Everest which could get a message back to Kathmandu and to the cable station via the British Embassy altered the complexion, did not, of my assignment. So I thought what I had to do, I couldn't afford to let the Indians who ran the radio post know what the news was, because it would be around the world in no time. We'd be beaten on our own news. Not to mention the people who were going to besiege the other end, the radio stations and the Indian embassy and all that sort of stuff. So what I did was I invented a devilishly clever code. By the way, it's perfect nonsense that I was an intelligence officer in the war. I was merely the intelligence officer of my regiment, which is a very lowly level indeed, for a particularly unwarlike subaltern, who was usually chosen to be the intelligence officer. Anyway, that's beside the point. Where did I get to?
You devilishly complicated.
The devilishly complicated one, really, it came from Le Carre. This one, you see, had for every place on the mountain and event on the mountain, it had a word. But the words could all be strung together to make a message which seemed to make sense. Do you follow me?
Somewhat.
But it would be the wrong sense. That's the point.
I see.
So if somebody filched it, they would see the mountain is snowbound, we can't do any more, and they accept it as being that.
Right.
So I only sent one message by it. It was a message which was, in fact, said the Everest had been climbed. And it said, actually, snow conditions bad, advanced base abandoned, awaiting improvement, all well. And that, in fact, meant that Tenzing and Hillary had climbed the mountain on May 29th, and that, in fact, we were all bloody well. Thanks a lot for asking.
That's what that meant.
That's what that meant. So I ran down the mountain with it to base camp, and I got a porter, one of my Sherpas, to take it to the radio post 25 miles away, and it went off safely.
Wow.
But the thing about this is, imagine the situation. Are you with me?
Totally
Right.
with you.
It was May the 29th, I think. Yes, I was up in the Western Kum, waiting to hear whether Hillary and Tenzing had got to the top. We couldn't know. We hadn't got radio communication. There was a scheme that they would put a sleeping bag out to show whether it had or had not, but they forgot to do that, so that was no good. So we just had to wait and see.
Hmm.
And eventually, as everybody knows, they did do it. They climbed the mountain. Announced by dear old Ed as, well, George, we knocked the bastard off.
Right.
very New Zealand. And they came down. And I met them, of course, once, and I got the story out of them. And I then realized, I'd half realized it before, that if I got down to the foot of the mountain straight away that afternoon, I might get the news to London in time for another event that was happening at the same time, to wit, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II.
Wow.
So it suddenly occurred to me, this really would be good, wouldn't it? It'd be sort of allegorical scoop.
Exactly.
But I'd only climbed up the mountain from base camp that day. I was very tired, and I was no good at climbing anyway. So nevertheless, I thought, it was now afternoon, I thought I've got to run down this mountain in the gathering dusk.
Oh, no.
Yes, my dear. So a nice climber called Mike Westmacott said, you can't go alone, I'll come with you. And so we did. Off we set, slithering down the mountain, through the ice fall, riding over great blocks of ice, avoiding avalanches. I was getting weaker and weaker. Every now and then I stopped, and he just tugged me on. Down we went, gathering dust, the snow, the wind, everything. And can you imagine the romance of it? Just think of it, slithering down Mount Everest with a message for the Queen Elizabeth of England.
Yes.
That was it, as the night came on.
Yeah.
So at last, hopelessly inept at the whole thing, I slithered, got down to base camp all right in time, and I sent off that runner.
Wow.
With my message, the secret message. You remember about the secret message, yeah?
Right. Base camp abandoned.
What?
Base camp abandoned.
And what next?
All well.
All right. So we sent it off, and I couldn't do anything about it then. It had gone. So, but I did. I had to write a long dispatch, and I did that too right there and then. But then I started for home myself, because there was no point in my going up the mountain again. So I started to go home, and the next night or the night after, I reached camp with my Sherpas, and in the morning I had a little radio receiver, I switched it on, and lo and behold, the crowds in London had been watching the golden coach pass by on its way to Westminster Abbey. All the Archbishop of Canterbury was waiting there, all the soldiers in their bearskins, some drum majors on their horses. The whole shoot was going through London. It was raining, of course, just for the atmosphere. The whole thing, grey old London and the golden coach, and bonk, in from Mount Everest came the news that a British expedition, bless your soul, had climbed the highest point in the whole world.
Wow.
We had our scoop, did we not?
Yeah. Yay! Bravo.
That's it.
That's it. That's an
And now I'm the only person left alive
right.
from that expedition. Isn't it?
Right. How does that? I don't ask this frivolously, but how does that make you feel?
Well, I was the second youngest person, so it's not surprising that I'd outlived most of them. But nevertheless, of course, it's always sad. It was a very nice expedition. It's a weak adjective, I know, but I liked using it. It was a nice expedition full of nice people, and they became my friends for life.
Yeah.
Really. Hillary became godfather of one of my children. And the man who helped me down the ice fall was a neighbour. I knew him very well for all these years, 60 years. Right?
Wow.
So it was sad when the last one went.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's not bad being the only one, is it?
No.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Exactly. That would be very awkward. No. Was everyone's lives singularly marked by that? Everyone who was on the expedition team, were their lives singularly marked by that?
Of course they were, yes, because it's cropped up always throughout all our lives, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But not all of them became distinguished just for climbing, you know. 2 or 3 of them were scientists and people who were eminent in their own fields.
Mm.
And one particular man, Mike Ward, who was the physician, it was just the beginning of the National Health Service in London when we got home. And that meant that there were 2 forms of public medicine. There was a state medicine, the National Health Service, or the other one. The other one was to make doctors very rich. Hmm. People went and, in no time at all, were setting up expensive clinics in Harley Street and charging 800 guineas for having an eye inspection. But Mike Ward, who was a very distinguished doctor, for the rest of his life worked in the East End of London and among the slums and very poor people. He never was tempted to join the money-making thing. Mm. There were good people, you know. All of them were, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And you continued to see them. I mean, you continued to have reunions and results celebrated.
I live in Wales among the mountains. Every 10 years, to begin with, every year, but then later, every 10 years, we used to have a reunion at a pub up there. Uh-huh. And we're having one, as a matter of fact, for people associated with it. They call it sentimentally the Everest family, but anybody who's sort of connected comes up there and we have a dinner together, and it's all very nice.
It's nice, it's nice. And how did it affect your career?
Well, I don't quite answer that. It hasn't affected my career as a writer, really, but it affected my career, obviously, as a journalist, right? Because it made me famous, really, for a bit. But it faded, you know, and anyway, I gave up newspapers, didn't make much of it. Yeah. But still, people still remember the story, you know. Right. People still ask me how high I got, and I have a standard answer: it gets higher every year.
How high did you get?
About 23,000.
And had you been a mountain climber before?
No, I was an absolute novice. Yeah.
Really?
But I was profoundly ambitious, you know.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I used to say that if anybody came up there with a radio transmitter who could steal the story from me, I was going to take my ice axe and destroy that radio. Nobody believed me, but I was. Yeah. I was prepared to do it.
You were serious about that. But luckily, was there any danger of the message being intercepted, or?
That last message?
Yeah.
It was intercepted. But people didn't realize that it was in the code.
Okay. So the code was...
Yes, a Reuters man who was friends with the radio people, he got it, and he thought there was something funny about it, because if it hadn't been climbed, we were going back again later in the year. You see what I mean? There'd be a second try. Right. So I wouldn't have bothered to send that message. So he thought there was something fishy. He couldn't quite figure out what it was. So it was all right.
Yeah. Wow. And then you wrote Coronation Everest.
Years afterwards, I wasn't allowed to write a book at the Times. I wasn't allowed to have my name in the paper. You know, it was anonymous in those days.
It was anonymous?
Yes, I was only a special correspondent.
So the dispatch announcing the ascent didn't have your name associated with it?
No, only by our special correspondent.
Wow.
That was quite enough.
Right. So when were you allowed to write the book?
I think it was about 10 years later, wasn't it? Something like that, yes. By which time nobody wanted to buy it. Everybody else was making fortunes, not me.
So do you feel that really, it helped your career as a journalist, but it didn't really catapult your career, it sounds like you're saying?
Because the career petered out anyway, you know. I gave up doing it. I just wanted to write books, yes.
Right.
I've only done one book about the mountains remotely. I mean, that was Coronation Everest, about this epic story of going down the mountain.
Amazing.
Which thrills us to this day, does it not?
It does indeed, yes. Yes. So when did you make the transition to writing books, from journalism to books?
Well, very soon after, I left the Times and joined the Guardian for a time. I messed around in the Middle East and a few things like that. And then what happened? I got a Commonwealth Fellowship to come to America.
Right.
And that sort of withdrew me from the journalistic career, really, in the end.
Mm-hmm. And where was your first stop in America?
I'll tell you the story. The Commonwealth Fellowship, a Harkness Fellowship it was called.
Uh-huh.
It was very, very generous. It was a very good thing. You had a year, and you had a car. You were given a car.
They gave you a car?
Well, they
as
bought
part of
one.
the fellowship?
Yeah. And you were supposed to do a quarter of the time, I think, at a university. And they said, well, you've got to put down field of study. I didn't have a field of study, so I put international relations, like that. So they said it was fine, yes, grown up for international relations. And they arranged for me to go to the University of Chicago.
Ah.
So I started my American career in Chicago, which I'm very fond of.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't fond of the university. I thought it was gloomy and dismal and riches and horrible, so I gave up after about a week.
After a week?
And spent the rest of the time on the other part of the fellowship, which was insisted upon that you should travel around America. So I spent a year traveling around America. Lovely, wasn't it? My family came over. I had 2 children. They arrived, and we bought in a Chevrolet. Excellent car. Best car I've ever had, I think. And we drove all around the United States, and I wrote pieces for the Times while I went. And at the end, I wrote my first book as a result of this thing, which I dedicated gratefully to the Commonwealth Fund.
Yeah. And you came to New York on that.
I did,
trip.
yes.
Do you remember your first impressions of New York?
I do. I must just say that it really, genuinely was the best present I've ever had in my whole life. It altered my life, and apart from the terrific fun of it, that really did change me much more than Everest.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask, before you answer my question about New York, how did that change your life? Why do you mean it actually changed your life that much?
But it broadened my outlook very much. Otherwise, I might never have come to this part of the world, I suppose. It introduced me to America. I've come every year since. For 60 years, I've come to New York City. That's more than can be said for most of this audience.
That's probably true. Every year for 60 years, you've come here.
That's right, yes.
Wow.
This is the 60th anniversary of my Everest.
Of your New York
my New York expedition, yes.
What is it about New York that draws you here?
Well, it's a funny thing, but I've always found New York a very kind city. I believe strongly in kindness. It's the supreme principle of life.
Right.
And I've always felt I was among kind people in New York. And I've always thought if I had to have a heart attack, which I may at any moment, by the way, in New York, I'd rather have it here than I would on the rural streets of Clandestinbury at home, where they probably wouldn't bother.
Really? Because that's somewhat counterintuitive. A lot of people don't necessarily think of New York as a...
I know they don't know, but I'm right.
Well, of course you are. Of course you are. And you don't need to have a heart attack to prove that.
No, I don't.
Yeah, we really
don't intend to.
do that. Good.
Touch wood.
After the book Coast to Coast, which was about your American journey,
yes.
What happened next in your career?
I got mixed up in an adventure in the Middle East. The then Sultan of Oman was going to counter a little rebellion that happened in the interior of his country. And I heard of this by one means and another. And I arranged with the Times to go back to the Times and to make the journey with the Sultan, which was to go across the whole expanse of Oman, which had never been done before in a motor vehicle.
Wow.
And only been once or twice by Europeans at all, to come to the middle of his country where the rebels were, squash them, and then go back to his capital. It was really a pioneering voyage, expedition, pioneering journey. That's what I want, because very, very few people had ever made the journey, and nobody had done it in quite these circumstances. I was traveling in one truck, and the other truck was the Sultan of Oman, and several other trucks of slaves. They were slaves, they really were slaves, but very treated slaves, I may say. Very graceful slaves, because they had a job for life. Anyway, off we set, and we did this. We crossed it when the rebels came and gave up to the Sultan, and with ceremonial and rifle fire and all sorts of stuff like that. And we drove on in state to triumph to his capital of Muscat, where he was welcomed by the adoring populace until they deposed him a couple of years later. But that was it. It was a very good and colourful journey, and I wrote a little book about it called Sultan in Oman, which was banned.
Was banned?
It was, I mean, in Oman.
In Oman.
Yeah. It still is, I think.
Really?
Although I've become friends with the people, nevertheless, maybe they've released it since the old Sultan is dead now. But I think it was because I portrayed him as a benevolent despot. He was a pretty strict and primitive despot, as a matter of fact, but I liked him, he was a nice man. So I expect that's why
he was a nice despot.
Yes. But no, I'm friends still. One of his brothers married a Welsh woman.
Oh.
And I was out there one day, and I went to her house. He was after his death. And she had a lovely palace there, as you expect of the wife of the brother of the Sultan of Oman. He ought to have a pretty nice house, hasn't he?
Yes.
And so we were showing around. I was going around with her. She'd been to my house in Wales. And I happened to see a not very good model of a dhow. I'm very interested in ship models. So I said to her, slightly dishonesty, really, I said, just to be nice, oh, what a lovely model of a dhow. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. I should have known better. You like it. My house is your house. It's yours. Oh. It's about this long, Oh. How am I going to get it home, said I. So she said, leave it to us in Oman. We do everything. Allah is with us, we'll do it. And she did. She packed it all up and wrapped up, and it's sent by carrier to Singapore somewhere, and then to Bombay and elsewhere, and then by aeroplane, and then by ships, and then by train. And anyway, at last this ship arrived at my house in the remotest Wales, where it sits to this day in the garden outside. And it's not a very good model. But there we are. That was in brackets. The whole story.
That whole story was in brackets. Okay. And what was the book that you feel like changed your career, sort of elevated you to a different level?
A book I did about Venice, which still is around now after all these years. Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's my best book. It's the one that made me best known, and it is still read very largely by people to this day. I mean, people who go to Venice very often buy this book, although it's wildly out of date.
Right. And how did that book come about?
It was because in the army, I occupied Venice. And it happened like this, that my regiment was in the Po Valley. We were resting there. We were going on to Palestine. But we were going to have a couple of months there before we embarked in the troop ships in Trieste and went over to Egypt. And one day my colonel called me into his tent. He was a very gentlemanly Welshman of ancient lineage. And he said to me, look, I'm terribly sorry to do this to you. It's very bad luck. I promise you it's no reflection upon you, and you won't have to go away for long. You'll come with us to Egypt. Don't worry about it, really, please. I hate to do it to you. It's like this. I've been told I've got to send one subaltern to help run the motorboats of Venice. To run the motorboats of Venice. Oh, I said, oh gosh, really? Yes, don't worry. He said, no, really, it's no reflection upon you at all. And we'll take you on. We will become the intelligence officer again when you go to Egypt. Perfectly on. Oh, well, it's very kind of you, Colonel. I say, what a pity. Never mind. I'll do it. It was the second best present I've had in life.
I guess so, right.
It was.
How long were you stationed there?
I think it was 6, well, no, it couldn't have been 6 months, 3 months, something like that.
3 months.
It's not very long. But very early in my writing career, I went back to Venice and lived there for a year and wrote this book.
Right. Was it love at first sight?
Yes, it was. It was, yes. But I have a taste for the melancholic, you know, and Venice then, just at the end of the war, was the most beautifully melancholic city you can imagine. It really was. It was melancholy because of its own history when it had lost its place in the world, and the glory of Venice was already faded. And it was melancholic now because it was a defeated city, and it was empty, and there were soldiers from foreign country there. It was all very, very, I loved it.
You loved it. Yeah.
But it was sad.
Yeah.
And I associated always with the lap of the water in the boathouse. We had a requisitioned the house, of course. I wrote the lap of the water, the noise of the lap of the water takes me back instantly to that first experience of Venice.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an image still, a visual image in your mind of Venice, your first impression?
I do, yes.
What's that image?
Mist, water, coupled with the cry of seabirds and the lapping of the land like that. And the strange old house that we requisitioned, which had belonged to a French minister in the past and was full of French mementos of old colonial wars and stuff like that. And a friend of mine lived in this vast house, looked after by menials. And that's years and years later, when I changed my identity altogether, I went back to look at this house, and it had been turned into a girls' school.
Huh.
And so I walked up to the house, and the gardener or somebody said, "I'm very sorry you can't come in here. This is private. It's a school." And I said, "Oh, that's a great pity, because 20 years ago, whatever it was, I used to live in this house." He said, "You of course, Madame, I remember you well." What a liar.
What a liar. But a charming liar.
Yes, yes.
The opening of your Venice book is really extraordinary. I can't quote it by memory, but it's one of the most wonderful pieces of evocations of place in literature, I think. And
thank you.
as a writer, I'm in awe of something like that. And I'm just wondering, do you remember the process of writing that and what it took to bring it all together? And how do you capture Venice in that way?
Well, I probably didn't think about it very much when I wrote it down, but I've always done, when I write a book, I do it 3 times.
You do it 3 times?
Yeah. Very often the first draft turns out to be the best anyway. But sometimes I've changed it. I can't remember in this case. I have a feeling that particular bit does, like I say it myself, it does flow very beautifully, doesn't
beautiful.
it?
Yeah.
It works well.
It works. It really works,
Yeah.
yes.
And so I think I probably was the first draft, it came spontaneously out of a young mind.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
When you were living there for a year?
Yeah.
And do you still write three versions of each book?
Yes, I always have.
How does that work?
How do you know the word? I wrote it 3 times. That's a silly question, really.
Well, I thought it was a code or something. So you really write from start to finish? You write the book 3 times?
I used to, but I have to admit that the computer's changed that a bit, hasn't it? Because it's so easy to change things as you go along.
Right.
But I do very thoroughly do it 3 times still. But not quite laboriously as in the old days when you had to start all over again.
Right. So Pax Britannica, you wrote
I did, yes.
3 versions of
Yes,
this book.
I've got the original. I've given them now to the National Library of Wales, but I used to have the 3 versions of each volume of that. Do you see what I mean?
I
so
do, yeah.
How many is that? 3 times 3? 12.
9.
Felt like 12.
It felt like 12, I'm sure.
And I had a picture taken of me, and then it comes up to about here, the big volumes for
Right.
manuscript, yes.
Typed or handwritten? Or?
Typed, yes.
How did you stumble on that? I mean, how did you get started doing 3 versions? How did that come about?
Oh, I don't know. I just...
It just worked
always
for you?
did. Yes, it does, yes.
But you're not... So you're writing you're changing the shape of the book with each version?
Sometimes I am, yes. As I say, sometimes the first one turns out to be the best anyway, yeah.
Right. Is there a book that, looking back, was a particular challenge to write?
Well, I suppose the biggest challenge was a trilogy I did about the British Empire.
Right.
That's the most scholastic, most intellectual book I've written, really.
Yeah.
A lot of the other ones came with the flow because I so loved doing it. You know?
Right.
I love doing the packs too, but that entailed a lot more checking of facts and stuff like that. You know, so
Right.
it's the most challenging.
And a library's worth of research.
Sort of.
So
yes.
much.
Yes, it is. It's a big thing.
And are you passionate about the research part of it as well? Do you surround yourself with books and just dive into them? And
Well, I do surround myself with books. I must say, I've never relied upon libraries, and I'm very glad I never did, because I always bought the books that I needed. With the result, I have rather a splendid library, you know?
yeah, yeah. Is there a book that stands out in your mind as the one you're most proud of, or feel will outlast you more than any other?
Well, yes, I think the best book I ever wrote was one about Trieste, which was my last complete book. I've done lots of compilations of things since then, but that was my last real, genuine book. Not a terribly long one, but that was my best book, I think. But I wanted to show, I happen to have a copy of my book with me.
You do?
Yes.
Oh,
This
how
is it.
fortuitous.
Yes, because I wanted to quote to you a thing in here which I think sums up in a very, very introspective sort of way what I think, what kind of a writer I think I am. Would you like to hear it?
Love to hear it.
Would you like to hear it? Well, there's only 6 lines, so you needn't clap. This is it. When communism failed in Poland, materialism took over. There were bright new shops, posh hotels, plenty of cars, all the usual paraphernalia of capitalism. Nice car, I remarked one day to the man who drove me to the airport in his big new Volvo. He shrugged his shoulders and looked at me with a dry smile. I knew what he meant. Well, no, I added in afterthought, I suppose it's not Chopin. And he knew what I meant too. Isn't that good? Thank you.
What is your goal as a writer? What would you say your goal is as a writer?
I haven't got one really. I really do write for my own pleasure. You know?
Your own pleasure.
I do. I've got a book coming out fairly shortly. It's a posthumous book.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's not bring it out too quickly.
I hope not. And it is called Allegorizings. Because I've come to feel in a long life that almost nothing has only one meaning. Nearly everything has at least 2 meanings, or sometimes more. And so this is a book of essays, really, of all kinds of different subjects, but all of which emphasize this particular aspect of the human condition. And you may read it. It will be in all good bookshops.
Right.
I hope.
You won't be doing a tour, I guess.
I might be.
Oh, well, that would be interesting.
Don't be so sure.
That'd be very interesting. Do you feel that your writing has evolved hugely over the course of your career, either the way you write or what you write about?
I think it's lost some of the joie de vivre.
Joie de vivre, really?
Yeah, I do think so, yes. I think the 30s was my best period, really.
The 30s?
Yeah. But in other ways, it's improved, of course. It's got a bit deeper. It's got these perceptions like this one about allegorizings that have grown up with me and upon me. So that in some ways the later books are better than the earlier ones. But for the sheer delight of them, if I may say so, I think it's the ones in the middle of the career.
Well, one of the things that always amazes and delights me in your writing is the way you evoke places and kind of get places. And I've always wondered how, that's a 2-part process. You have to apprehend the place first, and then you have to evoke it for other people. How does that process work for you when you're writing about whether it's New York or Venice or Sydney? How do you get the place, first of all? How do you apprehend it?
It's a pure gift.
You were born with it. Well,
I think so. But I obey certain rules. So Ian Foster said about writing a book about Alexandria, the best way to do it was to wander aimlessly around the city. And that's what I've always done, you know. And there's a quote from the Bible I always quote too. It says, grin like a dog and run about the city. Those two things, wander aimlessly, grin like a dog, and wander around the city, and gradually it soaks into the pores of the writer.
Wow. So you wander aimlessly.
That's right, I do.
Taking notes all the time?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And talking, I tell you, the main instrument of my travel writing has been the ability to ask the way to places.
To ask the way to places.
Because if you ask the way to places, people are always pleased to tell you, you know.
Right.
They're sort of flattered that they're the bosses, aren't they? They know the city. And so if you approach them in a respectful way and say, I'm terribly sorry to bother you, could you possibly tell me the way to 24th Street? Yes, of course, my dear. By all means. And then you'd go on about how you'd been there all his life and the advantages of living there and what snags there were and so on. So out of every conversation you really ask the way, you learn a lot about the city.
Right, right. Suddenly you've got a local person telling you their history, their city.
That's right. That's one bit of it, isn't it? One bit of the mosaic.
Right.
Another test I have is the smile test.
The smile test.
Have I told you about that?
No.
This is a system of wandering around the city, grinning like a dog. But in particular, smiling at everybody who passes you, you know. And this is a gauge to the nature of the city. It depends entirely on the origins of the populace and the state of the city, the economic state of the city, and all this you can get out of the response you get. So some people, immediately, if you smile at them, they think, what's this? What does she want out of me? Other people say, oh, she can't be smiling at me, she must be smiling at somebody else. You know? But the more open-hearted people, in particular San Franciscans, they immediately smile back. And that's a gauge of the situation of the city at that moment, you know. And oddly enough, the place that failed worst in the smile test for me was one of the nicest cities in the world, really, Vancouver.
Vancouver.
Full of very nice people. But people who are so sensitive, really, that they can't think that I am smiling at them, if you see what I mean. And they don't want to hurt my feelings by smiling at me, because I wasn't smiling at them. It's very complex.
It is complicated.
And the fact that it is complex says something about the nature of the city, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
And how do you go about evoking a city after you've apprehended it as a writer writing about it for someone who's never been there, presumably? How do you do that?
Well, forgive me, but that really is the gift, isn't it? That's why I do this.
Right.
Because God told me how to do that.
He did.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you recognize that from an early age? Did you feel like that was your gift?
Yes, I did. It was the only one I knew. I wasn't any good at anything else. So I knew I was going to be a writer, yes, certainly. And what a stroke of fortune. The third happiest thing that's happened to me.
And you're a celebrated writer, of course, and I know that you're soon going to meet the Queen, I believe, for the third time. Is that correct? You're about to meet the Queen?
I think more than 3 times, I'm not sure. But it's always in a most impersonal way at some function or other. Yes.
And what's the one
not
coming up?
Not matey with them in the least. No.
What's the occasion that's coming up?
The 60th anniversary of Everest, yes. And I'm speaking at a do in London, you know. I tell you, I did the 50th anniversary, I did it then too. And in the course of that time, I was 10 years younger. And in the course of the speech welcoming Her Majesty and everybody sort of thing, I let it slip that I was a passionate Welsh separatist and and Republican.
You let it slip.
And
it
Republican
just kind of...
in the Welsh sense rather than the American sense.
All right.
And I thought it was funny. And other people thought it was funny too, I think. But somebody who was there from the Royal Geographical Society, who was the patron of all these things, was sitting behind the Queen, and he said it made her twitch.
Uh-oh.
Really? So this time they said to me, would you mind not doing the bit about the Welsh Republic? But in fact, they're right, I think. She's an old lady now. Same age as me, as a matter of fact.
Is that true?
Yeah,
oh.
Dead true. And it must be awfully boring to come to these things, for she doesn't want to go and listen to people talking about Mount Everest, does she, in the least? You've heard it all before. Dear God, can you hear Prince Philip? Oh, not another one. So I wouldn't have the heart to make her twitch again.
No.
And also, in fact, despite my views about it, and the Welsh sovereignty and all that stuff, she has been a good queen.
She's been a good queen.
I have to grant her that.
What has been good about her?
Well, I was converted to her, really, by the rapprochement at last, after all these centuries, between Britain and Ireland. And I happened to be in Dublin when she made a rather famous declaration and spoke a bit of Irish to it. It was lovely. She did it well, and it was a great moment of reconciliation. And I believe there might be one with the United States, too, one of these. If we're told to.
That would be remarkable.
We have instructions.
So, well, what will you say to the Queen this time? Have you thought about it?
I think I'm going to say you're a damn good queen.
That's perfect.
I was going to say you're a bloody good queen. for the benefit of dear old Prince Philip, I'm sure knows the word well. But I thought in the end, damn really better.
What's your next project, or what's your next trip? What are you working on now?
Well, I've got this posthumous book, which is a work perpetually in progress, because the agreement was that I would add things to this book until the fell day came, when I could no longer add things. But they've asked me now, as I lunched with my publisher here yesterday, and he said, would I mind not inserting things throughout the book, you know, because it's made up, you know, it's already there. Right. They proofread it, the whole thing.
Oh, it's all ready to go?
Yeah, I've had it about 3 years. And they said, would I not please put bits in like this to make it very much harder to prove it. But if I could possibly add bits at the end in one chunk.
Right.
So that's what I'm doing now.
An addendum to your posthumous book.
Yes, but it's got to be more than that. It's going to be part of the whole thing.
Right.
Yes. What was the question?
I think it was, what project or trip are you working on?
No, that's right. Because I've done another thing too.
What's the other thing you've done?
I've written a book which is a very awkward length, because it's 20,000 words, which is, as you know, not really a book, but it's too long, unless you happen to be on the New Yorker.
Right.
It's too long for an article.
Right.
And not long enough for a book. Also, it's a book that requires expensive illustration.
Oh.
Because what it is it's a book about, it's called Ciao Carpaccio. It's a book about the painter Carpaccio.
Ciao Carpaccio.
Yes. Ciao, you know,
right.
Carpaccio. Because I love the old painter.
And
I associate him very much with Venice. And so I've done this chatty book.
About Carpaccio?
About Carpaccio. You can't say anything about him because nobody knows anything about him.
Right.
But about his work and what he means to me and how I'm amused by it and how I love the old boy, that kind of stuff, you know, rambles on. It's quite a nice little book, but what will happen to it, I really don't know.
It doesn't have a publisher at
well,
this point?
There sort of has, yes, but they don't quite know how to do it, you know, what to do, because it's got to have colour paintings in it too. One theory is they might do it with details instead of whole page books. I don't know how it will work.
20,000 words?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think with the evolution of publishing? You could do an e-book.
Yes, that will probably be the fate of it in the end.
Right.
It'll be a little e-book.
A little e-book.
Yes, probably. But I only did it for fun, so I don't mind anyway.
Yeah. How do you feel about the changes in communication and publishing and that whole world in the course of your lifetime?
Well, I mourn the demise of so many bookshops. I'm an independent bookshop.
You mourn the demise.
That is sad, I must say, isn't it?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, as a customer of books, as well as a writer of books, I bless Amazon. Like, it's so easy, isn't it?
Right.
You know, I just get the thing on the computer, back it comes the next morning, beautifully packed. If I don't want it, I can send it back again. I can keep the packing for something else. It's so skillful, so well done, that I'd be a hypocrite to say I don't admire it. And I note that my favourite bookseller at home, a good friend of mine too, has kept this little bookshop which is Welsh and English, going very well over the years still. But I note that if he said, I can get you any book in no time at all. But what he does is he goes to Amazon.
Oh.
I'm afraid. But as to the e-book, of course, for writers, really, for my sort of writer, it's a good thing. I mean, I don't have a vast audience, and I'm not a bestseller, I never have been. But I like the sort of people who read me. I like them to read me.
Right.
And a lot of them now don't have a lot of money. They can get it much cheaper on the e-book on one of these programs or others. So I welcome it. I get a small royalty from it.
Right.
I like the more people who read my books, the happier I am.
Right. Right. Exactly. So it makes it available to a wider audience.
It does. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But I know it's bad for publishers, at least they say it is, don't they?
Yes. Yes. It's a difficult time right now for publishers.
Yes, so they say, but they've said that ever since.
They've always been
publishers,
saying that.
yes.
Right. From the first book.
Yeah, that's right, probably.
Right. And are you?
No, the Bible did well.
The Bible did well.
Over the years. But then it's a good book.
Right. Are you on social media? Have you kept up with those sorts of iterations of the world?
Well, I'm not a member of what you call it, Twitter, but I look at Twitter.
You look at Twitter.
Because I like to see what people said about me.
So you religiously check Twitter to see what people are saying about
It's usually quite a different Jan Morris, who works for some health cure system. There's a lot about her.
Who gets mentioned a lot.
Every now and then. I was on it in relation to this. It was on Twitter.
Oh.
3 times.
Well, there we go.
Oh, wow, I know.
What do you, looking back at your career as a writer and as a traveler, what do you feel are the most important lessons you've taken away from all of your years of traveling and writing? Lessons about writing or places or people?
Oh, the biggest lesson of life for me is the incomparable importance of kindness, which I believe to be the answer to all our problems, if only we could exploit it properly and recognize it and value it. In fact, I've several times threatened to found a party of kindness, because I believe kindness is not only valuable in itself, but it's actually sellable. I believe if a political party could base its policies upon kindness, it would be a winner, you know.
Yeah.
Once people understood what the range of kindness, what it can do, what it can mean, what pleasant it is, how lovely it is, how kind it is, I think people would vote it in their millions. And, lots of people write to me about it and say, we'd love to join your party. But when I say lot, you know, it probably means 20. So it wouldn't be a big vote yet.
No. Are there acts of kindness that stand out in your memory that have been...
I had an act of kindness here yesterday. Well, I would in New York, of course.
Of course, right.
But I was wandering around yesterday on my way to lunch with my publisher. And it was a lovely day, wasn't it?
It was a
beautiful
day.
sunny day.
Amazing.
And what I wanted was to sit in an outdoor cafe somewhere in the street, you know, watch the street go by and have a cappuccino for a bit in the sunshine, thinking how lovely New York is and how nice everybody is. So I wandered around, I couldn't find anywhere, and I happened to look up a side street, and there I saw the tables of what looked like a rather posh restaurant, really. White, starched table, linen, you know, all that kind of stuff. And there was a man scribbling away at the couch or something in the corner of it. It was quite a grand restaurant. I've forgotten the name now. But anyway, I went up there, and the man was scribbling. And I said, do you think they'd give me a cup of cappuccino here? They said, this is not a coffee shop. It's a restaurant. We don't start till 12 o'clock. It was only 11:30. And even then, it's lunch, you know, it's a restaurant. But he said, well, if you want to ask, go ahead, go in and ask. So I did go in and ask. And immediately a man said, of course you can have a cappuccino. We're not open for dinner, lunch till 12 o'clock. Please have a table wherever you like. So I did. And I sat down, and he came and chatted in the nicest possible way. And at the end, I said, well, no, I must pay you for this lovely cup of coffee. He said, oh, no, don't pay. Just leave a little bit for the man in the kitchen. That would be lovely. So I did, and we parted.
Oh.
I thought it was pure New York.
It is pure New York.
I rang home and said, look what's happened to me in this lovely city.
That's a wonderful tale. Do you feel like kindness is growing?
Yeah, I think it is, I'm afraid, because the world is so awful. Everything else is so miserable. A touch of kindness can do wonders.
Right. And you feel like more and more people are joining the party of kindness?
20, huh?
It's on its way.
Yes.
Is there a place that in your mind you just keep wanting to go back to, or in person you keep wanting to go back to? I mean, Venice, I think, for a long time was the place you wanted to go back to.
I'm home, you know. I'm terribly homesick wherever I go. I want to go home tomorrow.
You want to go home?
Otherwise, the one that has sort of captured me more than anywhere else really is Trieste. Trieste I knew in the army too, has introduced me to it. For the same reasons, only more so in a way than Venice, because Trieste, as you know, was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for years.
Right.
And then it was detached from that after the First World War. And then the empire collapsed anyway. And Trieste, ever since, has been in a sort of limbo. You know, it's on the borderline between cultures and historical episodes and nations. And it's on the edge always. And I like that, you know, I enjoy that. I enjoy the ambivalence of it and the fact it's never quite thing nor the other. It's always on a fold in the map.
Right. Right.
So that suits me very well, and I fall easily into the same happy and melancholic mood as I potter around Trieste.
And so you go back there every year, or?
I do, yes.
Yeah. I think you identified very heavily with Trieste, as I recall in your book. You talk about.
Yes, I do. It's come in a lot of other of my books. They're not about Trieste, but it often crops up.
Yeah.
I did a book about Europe, in fact, and I made Trieste the centerpiece of it all. It was the center of Europe, which it certainly isn't.
Yeah. Is there a place that you still long to go to that you haven't been to yet?
Yes, I'd like to go to Tibet, but I swore long ago that I wouldn't go until the Dalai Lama was going to take possession of the Potala. Then I'd be there.
Wow.
But it doesn't seem to be happening in my time, does it?
Not too sanguine about that.
No.
Oh. Might you change your mind and just go anyway, just so you can go and see it?
You can now, of course, can't you? But
Yes.
no, I want to go and see it under Chinese administration.
Right. Right. Have you been back to Everest?
No, I've been back to Darjeeling to look at Everest, and I was commissioned to go now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to go back to look at it from Tiger Hill in Darjeeling, a celebrated view of it.
Right.
But you know, I just didn't feel up to it.
In which sense you didn't feel up to it?
Physically.
Physically?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Right. Do you have a nostalgic feeling when you think about Everest now?
No, not especially. No, I can't say I do.
Yeah.
I love mountains, you know, but Everest is only the Alps higher, so to speak, isn't it? And the Alps are just over there.
Alps higher.
In fact, Snowdon is just here.
Snowdon is just here.
Well, I mean, I have to cross the Channel to get to the Alps.
Oh, right.
But our highest mountain is Snowdon.
Is right.
I can see from my window.
Right. Right.
I don't have to get on a bloody aeroplane. I don't have to drive to Manchester Airport. Do I have to fill in dozens of forms, have a sleepless night, get in some wretched hotel? I can stay at home in bed. That's what happens when you're 87.
Right, okay. I have just one last question for you, and I'm wondering if there's something that remains for you as a dream, either a writing project, a life project. Is there something that you still feel you really want to see happen in your life?
Well, I don't want to sound pious or anything, but I'm serious about the kindness bit.
Yeah.
I would like that to be accepted as a general rule. It's a hazy rule, but it's a very good rule. I like it to be, the very word is good. I think if school children were taught that kindness is fun, as well as profitable, I wish I could exploit this whole idea of kindness as being a very, very important thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be dressed up as any mumbo-jumbo of religion. You don't have to be religious to be kind, you know. Right. You can just be kind.
Yeah.
That's what I stand for now.
Yeah, and you are. I mean, one of the things that amazes and delights and inspires me in your writing is how all your writings are infused with such incredible open-heartedness and true kindness towards the world and the planet.
Thank you.
Yeah, and well, thank you for all the great work that you've done, and thank you very much for sharing yourself with us here tonight.
Oh, bless your heart.
Thank you.
Bless your heart. Thank you. Very nice conversation. Thank you.